The cold was a constant companion. It lived in the stone floors of the Black Moon pack house, seeping through the thin soles of her worn slippers. It clung to the damp rags she used to scrub those floors, numbing her fingers until they were clumsy and white. But the worst cold, the coldest of all, was the one that lived on the back of her right hand. It was a brand, a liar's rune, etched into her skin with dark magic a year ago. It did not burn with heat. It burned with a deathly chill, a shard of permanent winter that ached deep in her bones, a constant biting reminder of her worthlessness. Ilara squeezed the dirty water from the rag, her knuckles raw. She kept her head down, her curtain of drab brown hair hiding her face. Invisibility was survival. To be seen was to be noticed, and to be noticed was to invite pain. The Great Hall was loud tonight. Alpha Valerius was hosting envoys from a neighboring pack, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, spilled ale, and the cloying perfume of the high-ranking females. It was a world away from her own, a world of warmth and laughter she could only observe from the shadows. Her stomach was a tight, aching knot. She had not eaten since yesterday's meager portion of watery stew. Omegas ate last, and branded outcasts ate whatever was left, if anything. A heavy boot landed inches from her hand, spattering dirty water onto polished leather. Ilara froze, her heart seizing in her chest. She did not need to look up to know who it was. The scent of smug satisfaction and cruel power was his alone. "Still scrubbing, little liar?" Beta Kale's voice was a low sneer that slid under her skin. She flinched, pulling her hand back instinctively, trying to hide the rune. It was a useless gesture. He loved to see it. He was the one who had put it there. He had been the sole witness to her supposed crime, stealing healing herbs from the pack's stores. Her word against the Betas. It had not been a contest. "My apologies, Beta," she whispered to the floor. He nudged her shoulder with his boot, a casual act of dominance. "Look at me when I speak to you." Slowly, reluctantly, she lifted her head. Kyle was handsome in a sharp, predatory way that made her skin crawl. His smile was a weapon. He thrived on the fear he saw in her eyes. He had wanted her before. When she had refused him, he had broken her. Not with a swift act of violence, but with a slow, grinding destruction of her life. The accusation, the branding, the demotion to the lowest dregs of the pack. It was all his work. "The Alpha King is rumored to be making a tour of the northern packs," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "Imagine what a man like that would do to a branded thief. They say he has no tolerance for weakness, no patience for lies." Her blood ran colder than the brand on her hand. The Alpha King, Alaric, a name spoken only in hushed, fearful tones. A figure of legend, ancient and powerful, who ruled the territories with a fist of ice. They said he had not smiled in centuries. They said his heart was frozen. Kyle's smile widened. He saw her terror and savored it. "Perhaps I'll make sure he gets a good look at you. A gift, from our pack to his dungeons." He laughed and walked away, leaving her trembling on the cold stone. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the wave of utter despair that threatened to drown her. This was her existence: a bucket of dirty water, an aching hand, and the constant, suffocating presence of the man who had destroyed her. Later, huddled in her tiny alcove in the servants' quarters, she brought her branded hand to her chest. The cold from the rune seemed to seep directly into her heart. She wondered, not for the first time, what it would be like to feel warm. Truly warm, all the way through. It felt like a fantasy, a fairy tale for a girl who had forgotten what sunlight felt like. 2 weeks later, the fantasy turned into a nightmare. The Alpha King arrived. His coming was not announced with trumpets, but with a sudden, profound silence that fell over the packlands. The wind died. The birds stopped singing. A hush descended, heavy and absolute. Then he was there, at the gates of the pack house, flanked by two massive guards in black armor. Ilara was in the kitchens, peeling potatoes when the energy shifted. It was a pressure change, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the weather. Every wolf in the house felt it. A primal instinct to submit, to bow before an apex predator of unimaginable power. She heard the gasps and hurried footsteps from the hall. She stayed where she was, making herself as small as possible behind a rack of cooling bread. She wanted nothing to do with kings or alphas. She just wanted to survive the day. But Kale had not forgotten his promise. The kitchen door slammed open. "You! Out!" His command was sharp. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the thin flesh above her elbow, and hauled her from her hiding place. "No, please," she begged, her voice a useless thread of sound. He ignored her, dragging her through the corridors and into the great hall. The entire pack was assembled, their heads bowed. Alpha Valerius was on one knee before the throne, where the visitor sat. The Alpha King. He was larger than she had imagined, a mountain of quiet menace. He wore simple black leathers, no crown, no jewels, yet his power was more potent than any symbol of royalty. His hair was the color of winter frost, silver white and long, tied back from a face that looked carved from glacial ice. He was beautiful in the way a blizzard was beautiful, vast, merciless, and utterly lethal. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the palest gray, like a frozen sky, and they held no light, no warmth, nothing. They were the eyes of a being who had seen millennia pass and had been moved by none of it. Kyle shoved her forward and she stumbled, falling to her knees on the stone floor. The impact jarred her, but the humiliation was worse. Every eye was on her. She could feel their scorn, their disgust, the branded Omega, the liar. "Your Majesty," Kale said, his voice slick with false deference. "We are honored by your presence, but we must confess, we are shamed to have such filth in our midst. This one is a branded thief and a liar, a stain on the honor of our pack." He grabbed her right hand and thrust it forward, displaying the ugly, dark rune for the king to see. "We thought to present her to you as a gesture, a creature for your dungeons, so our lands may be cleansed of her." A collective gasp went through the hall. It was an audacious, cruel move, a public spectacle of her disgrace. Ilara's world narrowed to the rune on her hand, the cold of it flaring under the king's silent gaze. She wished the floor would swallow her whole. This was the end. A dungeon beneath a mountain of ice. It was a fate worse than death. The king did not speak. The silence stretched, becoming a physical weight that pressed down on them all. He just looked at her hand, his frozen eyes fixed on the brand. Ilara waited for the pronouncement of her doom. Then, he moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion. He leaned forward in the throne, his gaze lifting from her hand to her face. For the first time, he truly looked at her. And something impossible happened in the depths of those Arctic eyes. A flicker. A spark of something that was not cold, not empty. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but she saw it. He stood. The entire room seemed to shrink around his towering form. He walked down the dais steps, his boots making no sound on the stone. He did not look at Alpha Valerius. He did not look at the gloating Beta Kale. His gaze was locked on her. He stopped directly in front of her. The air around him was frigid, a personal winter that made her shiver. He knelt, an inconceivable gesture for a king, bringing his face level with hers. She could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the harsh set of his jaw. She could smell the scent of pine and cold, clean snow. Without a word, he reached out and took her right hand in his. His skin was shockingly cold, like touching marble in the dead of winter. But the moment his fingers closed over hers, a jolt went through her. It was not pain. It was not the biting chill of the brand. It was something else. A current of energy, a thrum of dormant power that shot up her arm and straight to her heart. The brand on her hand reacted. The deep, aching cold of it lessened, replaced by a strange, tingling numbness. The king's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. His gaze was intense, searching, as if he were looking past her skin and into her very soul. He saw something. Something no one else had ever seen. Something she did not even know was there. He let go of her hand and stood, turning to face a stunned and silent hall. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not a shout. It was quiet, deep as thunder rumbling beneath a glacier, but it carried to every corner of the room. "I'll take this one." The words hung in the air, simple, absolute, and utterly incomprehensible. Kale's jaw dropped. Alpha Valerius stared, his face a mask of confusion. "Your Majesty?" Valerius stammered. "She is a criminal, a worthless Omega." The king's frozen gaze shifted to Valerius, and the Alpha of the Black Moon Pack visibly shrank back. The temperature in the hall dropped another 10 degrees. "I was not asking for your opinion," Alaric stated. It was not a threat. It was a simple clarification of fact. "She comes with me." He turned back to Alara, who was still kneeling on the floor, her mind reeling. He extended a hand to her. It was a gesture of invitation, not command. Trembling, she placed her hand in his. He pulled her to her feet as if she weighed nothing. He kept her hand in his as he walked toward the exit, his guards falling into step behind them. He did not look back. He did not say another word. He simply led her out of the Black Moon Pack house, away from the only life she had ever known, a life of cold and misery. As they passed through the great doors into the unnaturally still air outside, she risked a glance over her shoulder. She saw Kale's face, contorted with a mixture of fury and disbelief. He had meant to send her to her doom. Instead, he had delivered her into the hands of a king. Ilara did not know if she had been rescued or merely transferred to a colder, more terrifying prison. The journey north was a blur of snow-dusted pines and silent, imposing mountains. They traveled in a carriage that was surprisingly warm inside, lined with thick furs. The king sat opposite her, his stillness a palpable force. He had not spoken to her since leaving her old pack. He simply watched her, his pale eyes unnervingly perceptive. She felt stripped bare under his gaze. He did not look at her with the contempt she was used to, nor with the cruel desire she had seen in Kale's eyes. It was something else entirely. Curiosity? No, it was more intense than that. It was recognition, as if he had been looking for something for a very long time and had, against all odds, found it in her. It made no sense. She was nothing. A branded Omega. What could an ancient king possibly see in her? His fortress was a spike of black rock and ice thrusting into the sky, a place that looked as cold and unforgiving as its master. But inside, the halls were lit with warm fires, and the air, while cool, did not carry the damp chill of the Black Moon house. It was clean, sharp, and smelled of wood smoke and winter herbs. She was shown to a suite of rooms that made her gasp. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. The bed was piled high with velvet blankets and soft furs. A private bathing chamber had a tub large enough for two, with steam rising from its surface. It was more luxury than she had ever dreamed of. A servant, a quiet older woman with kind eyes named Helga, laid out a simple but elegant dress of deep blue wool. "His Majesty wishes you to be comfortable," she said softly, her voice devoid of the judgment Alara expected. "Why?" Alara asked, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Why am I here?" Helga offered a small, sad smile. Only the king knows his own heart, and he has not shared it with anyone for a very long time. After a bath that washed away the grime and exhaustion of her old life, Leaving only the cold rune on her hand, Ilara dressed and sat by the fire. She waited. She did not know what she was waiting for. A summons? A command? A dismissal? Hours later, there was a soft knock on the door. The king entered. He had changed from his traveling leathers into a simple black tunic and trousers. He looked less like a king and more like a warrior at rest, but the power emanating from him was undiminished. He did not approach her. He stood by the door, his arctic eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "You are to remain here," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You will be given anything you require. You will not be harmed. This is my decree." She stared at him, her confusion warring with her fear. But why? He was silent for a long moment, his gaze dropping to her hand, which she had unconsciously hidden in the folds of her dress. "Your presence here serves a purpose." "What purpose?" she pressed, emboldened by a desperation to understand. "That is my concern, not yours," he said, the finality in his tone shutting down any further questions. He made it clear this was an arrangement, not a rescue. A boundary was drawn. She was a piece on his board, a tool for a purpose she could not guess. "This is not a reward," he continued, his voice hardening as if to convince himself as much as her. "You are my ward, nothing more. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Majesty," she whispered, dropping her gaze to the floor. Of course. How could it be anything else? She was a fool to even imagine it. He turned to leave, but hesitated at the door. "The healers will see to your hand tomorrow." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the opulent room that felt more like a gilded cage than a sanctuary. She was his ward, his property. He had made the rules clear. And yet, the way he had looked at her, the way his cold touch had quieted the ache of the brand, it felt like more than just a political arrangement. The king's healers were the best in the kingdom, but they were powerless against her brand. They examined it with grave faces, murmuring about dark magic and soul curses. They applied salves that did nothing and spoke incantations that faded without effect. The cold remained, a permanent part of her. Alaric was there for their final verdict. He stood in the corner of the infirmary, a silent, brooding statue of disappointment. "We are sorry, Your Majesty," the head healer said, bowing low. "The magic is woven into her very being. To remove it would be to unravel her." The king's jaw tightened. He dismissed them with a wave of his hand. When they were alone, he walked over to her, his gaze fixed on the rune. "Does it hurt?" His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual command. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He reached out, his fingers hovering just over the brand. He did not touch her, but she could feel the cold emanating from him, a deep, ancient frost that seemed to radiate from his core. It was a cold that dwarfed the chill of her brand. For the first time, she felt a sliver of something for him beyond fear. She felt pity. He was so utterly, profoundly alone in his winter. That night, he came to her chambers again. He did not knock. He simply entered and stood by the fire, watching the flames. He did not speak to her, did not even look at her. He just stood there for nearly an hour, a solitary figure lost in thought. It became a ritual. Every night, he would appear. He would stand or sit in one of the chairs, always keeping a distance, and simply be. At first, it was unnerving. She would sit rigidly on her bed, barely breathing. But as the days turned into a week, then two, a strange sort of comfort settled in. His presence was a shield. In his fortress, under his silent watch, she was safe. No one sneered at her. No one hurt her. The servants were respectful. The guards averted their eyes. Kale and the Black Moon Pack felt a world away. She began to sleep through the night without nightmares for the first time in a year. She started talking to him, quietly at first. She told him about the books she was reading from the castle's vast library. She described the patterns the frost made on her window pane. She spoke of small, simple things. He never responded with more than a nod or a low hum, but he listened. She could feel him listening with an intensity that was more intimate than any conversation. One night, she was reading by the fire when a log shifted, sending a shower of embers onto the stone hearth. One landed on the rug, which began to smolder. She cried out, scrambling to stomp it out, but she was too slow. Before she could even process it, Alaric was there. He moved with impossible speed, covering the distance between them in a single, silent step. He swept the smoldering rug aside with his boot and crushed the embers with his bare hand. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. He turned to her, his pale eyes searching her for any sign of injury. Yes, thank you," she stammered, her heart pounding. He looked down at his hand. There was no mark, no burn. His skin was too cold to be harmed by fire. He flexed his fingers, a strange expression on his face. "Your hand," she whispered, reaching for it without thinking. She stopped herself, her fingers hovering in the air between them. His gaze met hers. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with the near disaster. The boundary he had set, the wall of ice he maintained around himself, seemed to thin for a moment. He looked at her outstretched hand, then back to her face. Slowly, he reached out and took her hand. Not the branded one, the other. His cold palm engulfed her smaller, warmer one. The contact was electric. It was the same jolt as before, but stronger this time, more sustained. He held her hand for a long moment, his thumb stroking gently over her knuckles. The gesture was so tender, so at odds with his reputation as the Winter King, that it stole her breath. She saw it then, the flicker of deep, aching loneliness in his eyes. He was not just cold, he was starving. Starving for a warmth he had been denied for centuries, and somehow, impossibly, he found it in her. "The nights are colder than they have been in a century," he murmured, his voice so low it was almost a thought. "The curse deepens." "Curse?" she whispered. He pulled his hand back as if burned, the mask of indifference slamming back into place. "It is nothing." He turned away from her. "Do not be so careless with the fire again." The moment was broken. The boundary was reinforced. But it was too late. She had seen the man behind the king. She had felt the crack in his icy armor. And she knew, with a certainty that terrified and thrilled her, that the arrangement was becoming something more. Something neither of them had planned for. Something that could shatter them both. The fragile peace of their strange arrangement was shattered by the arrival of an envoy from the south, from the Black Moon Pack. Alara was in the library when she heard the commotion in the main courtyard. She peered through a high-arched window and her blood turned to ice. There, dismounting from a black stallion, was Beta Kale. He looked different here, smaller against the vastness of the king's fortress, but his arrogant smirk was the same. Her past had followed her. The cage she had felt so safe in suddenly had no bars, and the predator was inside. Panic seized her. She fled the library, her heart hammering against her ribs. She ran through the corridors, seeking the sanctuary of her rooms, but a voice stopped her. "There you are." She skidded to a halt. Kyle stood at the end of the hall, leaning against the stone wall as if he owned the place. Two of the king's guards stood nearby, their faces impassive. They would not interfere. He was a diplomatic guest. "I must say I'm impressed," Kale said, pushing off the wall and strolling toward her. His eyes roamed over her, taking in the clean wool dress, the healthy color in her cheeks. "The king has polished you up nicely, but a liar is still a liar, no matter how fine her clothes." "What are you doing here?" she whispered, backing away. "Official pack business." Alpha Valerius sent me to discuss territorial rights. He smiled, a flash of white teeth. A happy coincidence that it allows me to check on our pack's most infamous exile. He was close now, close enough for her to smell the familiar, sickening scent of his self-satisfaction. "He will tire of you," he hissed, his voice dropping so the guards could not hear. "A king does not keep a broken toy for long, and when he throws you away, who will be there to pick you up? I will, and you will be so very grateful." He reached for her, his hand aiming for her branded one. She flinched back, crying out, "Don't touch me." "Touching my property now, are we, Beta?" The temperature in the corridor dropped 20 degrees in a second. Alaric stood at the other end of the hall, a phantom of silent fury. He had not raised his voice, but the power rolling off him was a physical blow. Kyle froze, his hand hovering in the air. The king's guards snapped to attention, their hands on the hilts of their swords. Alaric walked toward them, his movements fluid and deadly, like an avalanche gaining speed. His pale eyes were not empty now. They were blazing with a silver light, a terrifying, cold fire. His beast was close to the surface, and it was looking at Kale as if he were prey. He did not stop until he was directly between Alara and Kale. He gently took her arm and pulled her behind him, shielding her with his body. He was a wall of solid ice and rage. He looked down at Kale, his superior height making the Beta seem small and insignificant. "You are a guest in my home. You will address my ward with respect. Or you will not address her at all." Kale, to his credit, tried to recover his swagger. "Your ward?" "Majesty, the girl is a branded criminal. I was addressing my future queen." Alaric cut him off, his voice lethally soft. The world stopped. Alara's breath hitched. The guards straightened, their eyes wide with shock. Kale's face went slack, his jaw hanging open. "Future queen?" The words echoed in the sudden ringing silence. It was the first she had heard of it. It was a lie, it had to be. A way to put Kale in his place, a political declaration. It could not be real. But the look in Alaric's eyes when he glanced back at her was not political. It was possessive, absolute. He turned his chilling gaze back to Kale. "You have concluded your business. You will leave my court by dawn. If you are found within my territory after sunrise, my wolves will hunt you down like the rabid dog you are." He did not wait for a reply. Keeping a firm, protective hand on Alara's arm, he led her away, leaving Kyle standing stunned and humiliated in the freezing corridor. That night, Alaric did not come to her rooms. She waited, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Future queen. The words were a brand of their own, marking her for a destiny she could not comprehend. Was it a threat? A promise? A cage far larger than the one she had imagined? The next day, the fortress was tense. Kale was confined to his quarters, awaiting his departure. But he was not a man to accept defeat gracefully. His ambition was a poison, and it had found a new target. Alara avoided the main halls, seeking refuge in a small walled garden where winter-hardy plants grew among stones. She needed to think, to breathe air that was not thick with unspoken threats. She did not hear him approach. One moment she was alone. The next, Kale was there, blocking the only exit. His face was no longer smug. It was twisted with a desperate, dangerous rage. "Queen," he spat. "You? A worthless barren Omega. He mocks me. He mocks us all." "Leave me alone," she said, her voice trembling but firm. She would not show him her fear. "I know his secret," Kale whispered, advancing on her. "I know about the Winter King's curse, the ice in his bloodline. It freezes the heart of any king who does not find his bonded mate. And you," he sneered, "you are no one's mate. You are an accelerant. You are drawing his weakness to the surface. You will kill him." He lunged, grabbing her. He was stronger, faster. He slammed her against the cold stone wall, his body pinning hers. He seized her right hand, his thumb pressing down hard on the liar's rune. Agony, sharp and blinding, ripped through her. The brand's cold flared into an excruciating icy fire. It felt as if he were driving a spike of frozen iron into her bones. A scream tore from her throat. A roar answered her. It was not a human sound. It was the guttural, soul-shaking roar of a beast of legend. Kale was ripped away from her, thrown across the garden as if he were a rag doll. Alaric stood where Kale had been, but it was not just the man. His form seemed to flicker, to shift, overlaid with the spectral image of a colossal, silver-furred wolf. His eyes were glowing, pure molten silver. His canines were elongated. His beast was out, unleashed by his rage. Kyle scrambled to his feet, drawing a dagger from his boot. The blade was black, etched with wicked-looking runes that seemed to drink the light. "You want her? You can have her in the afterlife," he screamed, a man driven mad by jealousy and ambition. He charged, not at Alara, but at the king. Alaric met the charge, but Kale was cunning. He feinted, dropping low and thrusting the cursed blade upward into the king's side. Alaric cried out, a sound of shock and pain that seemed to tear the world apart. He staggered back, clutching his side. Where the blade had entered, black ice was already forming, spiderwebbing across his skin, extinguishing the silver light of his beast. The cold that always clung to him intensified 100-fold. A visible aura of frost billowed from his body. He fell to one knee, his breath coming in ragged white plumes. "The dagger is forged with the essence of your own curse, Majesty," Kale panted, a triumphant, crazed look in his eyes. "It only helps the ice do what it was always meant to do. Freeze your heart to stone." Alaric collapsed. The black ice spread with terrifying speed, encasing his limbs, crawling up his chest. His silver hair turned brittle with frost. His skin became the color and texture of frozen marble. Ilara could only stare in horror. The king, the ancient, untouchable Alpha King, was dying. He was freezing into a statue before her very eyes. Kale turned to her, the bloody, cursed dagger in his hand. "Now," he said, his voice shaking with mad victory. "We can finish what we started." But as he took a step toward her, the king's guards swarmed the garden, alerted by the king's roar. They subdued Kale in seconds, disarming him and dragging him away, screaming curses and prophecies of doom. Ilara was left alone with the frozen form of the king. She rushed to his side, falling to her knees on the cold ground. She reached out to touch his face, but recoiled. His skin was colder than stone, colder than the brand had ever been. It was the cold of absolute death. "No," she whispered. The bond between them, the fragile, unspoken thing that had been growing in the quiet of her chambers, was screaming in her soul. It was a cord being stretched to its breaking point, a lifeline fraying into nothing. She could feel him, fading, disappearing into the ice. The healers came, their faces grim. They could do nothing. The curse, amplified by the dagger, was absolute. The king was gone. They tried to lead her away, but she refused. She would not leave him. For days, she sat by his frozen body, which had been moved to his great bedchamber. The room was unnaturally cold, frost climbing the walls. The court fell into despair. The kingdom was without its king. Alara did not eat. She did not sleep. She held his frozen, lifeless hand in hers, her own small warmth seeming like a pathetic insult to the continent of ice he had become. She talked to him, her voice growing hoarse. She told him about the life he had saved, the small flicker of hope he had ignited in the ruins of her soul. She told him he was a fool, a stubborn, lonely fool for hiding his heart away. "You can't leave me," she whispered, her tears freezing on his marble-like skin. "I won't let you. You saw me. You were the only one who ever truly saw me. You don't get to be blind again." She felt it then. The last final flicker of his life force, about to be extinguished by the encroaching ice. It was the guttering of a candle in a gale. Desperation, raw and absolute, clawed its way up her throat. It was not just grief, it was defiance. It was a rage against the injustice of it all. The world could not take him, not after she had just found him. She climbed onto the bed, straddling his frozen form. She placed both of her hands flat against the ice covering his chest, directly over his heart. She closed her eyes and poured everything she was into that touch. All her pain, her loneliness, her fear, and the terrifying, beautiful, brand new love that had taken root in her heart. "No," she said, the word of vow spoken to the gods, to fate, to the curse itself. "He is mine." A fire ignited within her. It started deep in her core, a searing heat she had never known. It was not the burn of an ember, it was the birth of a star. It surged up through her body, a torrent of molten life. It flooded down her arms and into her hands. A brilliant golden light erupted from her palms. It was the color of liquid sunlight, of pure, undiluted life. It blasted against the black ice on his chest, and the ice hissed, steaming, retreating from the onslaught of warmth. The liar's rune on her hand, the source of all her cold and pain, flared with an unbearable heat. It felt as if her very skin were being burned away. She screamed, but she did not let go. The dark magic of the brand sizzled, fought back, and then shattered. It dissolved into a wisp of black smoke, vanquished by the pure, holy fire of her power. Her hand was clean. Her soul was clean. The power, now unhindered, erupted from her. It was a tidal wave of healing, of life itself. The golden light engulfed them both, filling the entire room. The frost on the walls melted, running down in streams. The frigid air warmed, becoming soft and sweet. Beneath her hands, the ice encasing Alaric's body cracked. It shattered like glass, sublimating into mist. The ugly black wound in his side steamed and closed, the skin knitting itself back together, leaving no scar. And under her palm, against all odds, she felt a thud. And another. His heart was beating. The light receded, drawing back into her, leaving her utterly drained, panting for breath. She collapsed against his chest, her strength gone. A hand, warm and strong, came up to cup the back of her head. She lifted her face, her vision blurry with exhaustion and tears. Alaric was looking at her. His eyes were no longer the pale gray of a frozen sky. They were the color of molten silver, alive with light, with warmth, with an emotion so profound it struck her speechless. He was breathing. He was warm. For the first time since she had met him, his skin held the heat of a living man. "You," he rasped, his voice thick with awe and disbelief. "It was always you." He pulled her down to him, his arms wrapping around her, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart against her cheek. He was real. He was alive. "The curse," he murmured into her hair. "My bloodline is cursed with a shard of the great winter. It builds, generation after generation, freezing us from the inside out. The only thing that can stop it is a soul of pure life. A sun to melt the ice. Our bonded mate." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I have been searching for centuries. I had given up hope. I was turning to stone, and I had accepted it. Then I walked into that hall, and I saw you. And my beast, my soul, it knelt. It recognized its son, hidden under all that pain." Tears streamed down her face. "You called me your future queen." "I was not making a political statement," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate growl. "I was stating a fact. You are my mate, Ilara, my healer, my queen, my life." She finally let herself believe. All the self-doubt, all the whispers of worthlessness that had haunted her for years, they burned away in the warmth of his gaze. He had not seen a branded Omega. He had seen her, the real her, the one with a sun hidden inside her. "What about Kale?" she whispered. A dangerous light flared in his eyes. "While I was incapacitated, my beast was not. It saw the threat to you, to its mate. It acted." He paused. "The guards found his body at the edge of the woods, at dawn." The finality of it sent a shiver through her, but it was not of fear. It was of a brutal, necessary justice. The monster who had tormented her was gone, dealt with by the protective fury of the beast who saw her as his own. He held her, just held her, for a long time. They just breathed together, her warmth sinking into him, his strength surrounding her. It was a reunion not just of two people, but of two halves of a whole, the ice and the sun, the winter and the spring. Months later, Ilara stood on the balcony of their chambers, looking out over the kingdom. Alaric came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. His chin rested on her shoulder, his warmth a constant, comforting presence. She was no longer Ilara the Branded. She was Queen Ilara, the Sun-Hearted. Her power had not just saved him, it had begun to heal the land itself. The perpetual winter that had gripped the mountains around the fortress for centuries had begun to recede. On the lower slopes, for the first time in living memory, green shoots were pushing their way through the thawing earth. Spring was coming to the Winter Kingdom. The court, once terrified of their cold, distant king, now revered their queen and adored the change in their ruler. They saw him smile now, small, rare smiles reserved only for her. They saw the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. She had not just healed his body, she had thawed his soul. She held up her right hand, turning it in the pale morning light. The skin was smooth, unmarred, with no trace of the rune that had once defined her. She was not marked by her past anymore. She was forged by it. "What are you thinking about?" Alaric murmured, his lips brushing her temple. "I was thinking about how cold I used to be," she said softly, "and how I never thought I'd feel warm again." He tightened his arms around her, his love a tangible shield. "I will spend the rest of my very long life making sure you are never cold again." It was a promise she knew he would keep. She had a home. She had a pack that loved her. She had a king who saw her as his entire world. The abused girl scrubbing floors was a ghost, a memory. In her place stood a queen, a healer, a woman who had faced down darkness and brought forth the dawn. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that their story was just beginning. More challenges would come, more shadows would threaten their light, but they would face them together. The Winter King and his Summer Queen, united and whole at last.